You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management archaeology and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome to CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 316. I'm joined here today by Doug in Scotland.
Hey, everyone.
And Andrew in Southern California.
Hello, my many friends and party people.
And today, we actually got this past week, got a couple questions from listeners, and we're going to tackle one of them today in today's podcast. So I'm just going to go right into that. Her subject line is In Search of Career Advice for an Aspiring Archaeologist. And so here it goes. I'm looking for some advice regarding an unusual career progression that I'm planning for. Hope you all can help. Here's a little background. I'm 30 years old and originally went to school for communications with a graphic design emphasis. I worked as a graphic designer for about a year, but then decided to pursue flying. She grew up in a family full of hobby pilots, in parentheses. I worked as a civilian flight instructor for about 5 years, both stateside and in Japan. And in parentheses, her husband was in the military at the time overseas. After that, I decided my life wasn't crazy enough and joined the US Airforce as a pilot. I'm now stationed in Texas. The unfortunate part is that my commitment as a military pilot isn't up until 2034, and my true passion is archaeology. So I'm playing the long game in most cases to upgrade through certain ranks in the military. They like you to have a master's. I get tuition assistance each semester, enough to cover one online class, and would like to start pursuing something that will benefit my archaeologist aspirations in the future. Would you guys recommend anthropology or something of that nature until I can get a bachelor's in archaeology? I know there's a lot to ask of you, but I'm really just looking for some general guidance. And then says, podcast on APN are the highlight of my weekend. So thank you so much for sharing your stories. Thank you very much. We didn't ask if we could name her specifically, so I won't include her name, but she knows who she is. And thank you very much for your question. And of course, it's not a lot to ask because we like talking and sharing whatever knowledge we have, accurate or otherwise. I have a few thoughts on this, but how about Doug and Andrew? Would you like to chime in to start off?
Yeah, it's one of those ones where it'd be good to have a little bit of email conversation with this person back and forth, because I'm a bit wondering why she might be aiming for a bachelor's, and maybe it just might not be that common knowledge, but you don't need a bachelor's in archaeology, anthropology, go in to get a master's. It can help, but I would actually, possibly my recommendation would actually be it's in like maybe a field school. I'd actually recommend it. Obviously, she knows the CRM podcast, so I think she's interested in CRM. Archaeology is a pretty wide profession, so there's a lot of different things you could do as a job. She had mentioned that she has background in graphics, so you could even be a archaeological illustrator, though maybe she doesn't want to do illustration or is tired of graphics or anything like that. But there's a whole range of possibilities. And my advice is always, and standing advice is, if you're interested in archaeology, go out and try some archaeology first to really make sure that you're actually interested in it. So I'd actually recommend like a field school. And again, some classes, undergraduate classes could help with a field school, but you could pretty much jump in. And a lot of people do like public archaeology digs without any class or any background whatsoever. So if she's looking at field work or anything like that, and there are some field schools that do more lab-based, and it depends. You can probably find something with the sort of area you might be interested in. But I would recommend that side if you really like it, and then actually look at master's level courses, classes, and jump right into that instead of doing an undergraduate, because she already has a bachelor's. Can feel a bit, I can imagine you feel a bit hesitant going to that without having that background. But to be fair, most people who are getting an undergraduate, it's going to be liberal arts. You're only actually going to have 20 to 30 some credit hours in archaeology. If that, 'cause it's usually in anthropology. So you're not going to be too much disadvantaged compared to, I would say, vast majority of people who go straight from a bachelor's to a master's instead of doing any sort of CRM background or any other work. I don't know. Just reading from that message, I would say go master.
I agree. Andrew, do you mind if I jump in? Just have a thought and then.
It's hurtful, and I'm going to need counseling after this, but I guess you could.
Okay. So I totally agree that, to me, as a returning student and as somebody who did archaeology as my second career, or third career, time is of the essence in order to really establish yourself in the business, to give yourself enough time to establish yourself in the business. So I wouldn't waste the time getting a specific archaeology degree. The one thing is that you need to consider is what kind of program you're going to go into. So if you're interested in going into CRM, then I would definitely pick a very specific CRM focused program. And the one thing I could see you feeling like you're a little bit behind would be on some theory. So depending on the program that you're in, so you'd be going into the deep end if the program is very theory based. So you're going to be reading a lot of thick material that you haven't been introduced to before through communication. So maybe you could take a couple classes in anthropological theory or archaeological theory, and just to get your feet wet into what are the foundations of anthropology and archaeology. But other than that, I would take maybe a couple classes and then I would go straight to a master's. I have a few other thoughts in that, but Andrew, let you chime in.
Okay, so first she said, I know this is a lot to ask, and it sure is, because I need time to think big archaeological thoughts. And here I am trying to help someone. Whatever, dude. Whatever. It is a big ask. Anyway, no, I get this question like all the time, right? Yeah, for me. For the rest of you, like plebes, it's no big deal. But for me, this is me.
I was thinking the other way.
In serious, I've gotten this question a ton of times over my career, even from people in the military too. I've had every flavor of this. And I agree with both of you guys. Isn't it boring when all three of us agree? But I guess I can add a little nuance to some of it. First, it's funny when she was saying she's 30 now and she's out in, I believe it was 2034. I think I quickly did the math and she's going to be like 38 or 39 or something, which is not the end of the world. You know what I mean? It sounds 2034. She'll be 78 years old. But I would say this time right now for her is just use it wisely. And I totally agree with like Doug. I would go straight to the master's. I've seen several people do this in my career. And how I would play it, I don't have her transcripts obviously in front of me, but has she ever even taken an intro to archaeology class? If not, it's fine. I would enroll in like a local community college and I would just do a couple, like if they have intro to archaeology, definitely take that. As you guys were saying, if there's any field school or any version of a Saturday class like I do, something vaguely locally, do that. Maybe even volunteer at a museum on a weekend or something like that, just to get into it. And also she could contact like a local master's program or whatever and see what they would want. Just cold call them and be like, hey, I have this degree in communications, but I realized in my life journey that I love archaeology. So what would you guys want to see for me to go straight into a master's? And I'm pretty sure, in my experience, the students of mine who've done that have had to take obviously extra classes before they're like okayed as a master's student. So even stuff like make sure in all your college wanderings you've taken statistics, because it's always on there. So I would say take statistics, take an intro to archaeology and the archaeology specific stuff. Maybe take like intro to cultural and intro to biological if you haven't. But I would go based on what does that school say? Because if that school is smart, and they usually are, they want you to come there as a grad student. So use them, give them a call and be like, what should I be doing with myself for the next couple of years? And again, I've seen several people do this and be totally successful. So this is a very good time in life for her to look at this. It's 1,000 miles from too late, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's actually fairly common. So with my master's program, it's been a decade, so I might get the numbers wrong, but I think there was about 18, 20 of us.
Yeah.
I was the only one that actually had CRM experience. And possibly only a couple of other people actually did undergraduate, what you could call being the state, most of them from the States. So one or two, this is over in the UK. So one or two were like British who did like an archaeology undergraduate. And then we had about two other people who were American who had done sort of anthropology as an undergraduate. And then everyone else was like history. We did have someone who was communications as well. English lit, I think there was something like that or the equivalent. So yeah, like in terms of the master's program I went into, I was unique in that I actually had CRM experience. I think one other person had done like a week or two, and that was about it. And in terms of, I was definitely in the minority on having a anthropology and archaeology undergraduate degree. And I do say it does help, that background, but if you're following what Andrew said and just take that intro to archaeology class, that's going to, especially if you're doing that without a break, like you do that and then you start going into your master's, it's not going to, you're going to get most of those key concepts. And then again, I think the reason I'm recommending a master's is like 4 years undergraduate degree. I mean, you're still going to be doing 3/4 of that is going to be liberal arts. So you're going to be taking a bunch of other courses that, yeah, they're great and they're fun, but it's your actual amount of archaeology that you do, especially like if you're doing, there's the occasional archaeology undergraduate, but almost everything's anthropology. So you're actually doing an anthropology degree, which usually is going to require you to do, as Andrew had mentioned, like a cultural anthropology class, a biological anthropology class, and potentially on your program, maybe something in linguistic or a mixture of those three. And that's 3 or 4 classes that are not too relevant, that I would say they were interesting. I enjoyed my biological anthropology course. You're only looking at like a handful of courses, or sorry, I should say classes that you actually take that are going to be relevant to archaeology. So you're not going to be too far behind if that's a worry.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, agreed. So Andrew and Doug, some great advice on the education side. And in the next segment, let's talk from the CRM management perspective. We'll be right back. Welcome back to CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 316. And we are answering a listener's question regarding what to do while she is finishing up her obligation. First of all, before we even go further, I want to say thank you for your service. I greatly appreciate that. I'm mother of a US Army officer who's currently deployed and very much appreciate your service to our country. So thank you. So we talked in the first episode about the educational considerations. So I think, we'll just recap real quick. As far as education, you don't need an archaeology bachelor's before you move on to graduate school. It might be a good idea to take a few classes just to get your feet wet. Make sure this is something you want to do. Take a field school if that's something you have time to do. It sounds like you are stateside and you are active duty. But again, you want to take a few classes maybe to make yourself feel a little bit more comfortable going into a graduate program. But another aspect that Andrew brought up that I think is smart, let's just use your time wisely, especially if you're only allowed one class. That's a long go, one class per semester. Maybe you can do more. It's just that only one class is paid for. But anyway, without that, another aspect is making sure that you're looking at the programs that you'd like to go into, knowing that you may be doing this online since you're active duty and it's one class a semester. You could do more, but really going into figuring out which graduate school you want to go into. And if it's CRM, there are some online CRM programs. So looking at what are their requirements. So if you're going to take classes before you go into graduate school, because right now it's a little late to be jumping into a grad school now. So you have a year. You could potentially join the next half of the year, but maybe you have a year and it gives you some time to get some classes under your belt, make sure that the classes that you're taking do qualify you for the prerequisites for the graduate program you want to enroll in. And then I don't see there's any reason why you couldn't go ahead straight into the graduate program next fall and start your journey. By the time you're finished with your obligation, you'll definitely be done with graduate school. So as a CRM hiring, somebody who's hiring in CRM, if that's the way you want to go, I would say academia is going to be a long road. You definitely get some more dispensations because you are in the military, but it's becoming more difficult to actually get a tenure position as a professor. So I really do think if you want to do archaeology, CRM is probably the best way to go to actually know that you're going to have a job. So what I'm looking for, I have to say, I'm not saying that people with PhDs are a no-go altogether, but if somebody is steeped in academia, it makes it difficult for them to transition into the CRM world. And I know some people are going to disagree with me, but this is from firsthand experience. And unless you have somebody who really understands the CRM world, if somebody's been in academia for a long time, it is a difficult transition. And I personally, and I know a lot of other hiring managers, will look hard at a PhD and see what their needs are with respect to their practice at their company and whether or not that PhD can fulfill those roles. I'm looking for somebody who is, first and foremost, whether you have a graduate degree or not, is trainable, is good to work with, and has some desire to understand the business side, our practice, and also the business side, and also the regulatory side of our business. So a lot of times the PhDs either have not been steeped in that or they have no interest or no acumen towards it. Again, I know not everybody's going to agree with me on that, but I don't think it's necessary if you're going to go into CRM to get a PhD. So that is something you will likely be done with your academic career, with your graduate degree before you're even done with your obligation to the US Air Force. Another potential is if you were to switch to the Air National Guard. I don't know how much. I did a little bit of a Google search to see if that changes your obligation. I know in some branches it does not, as long as you're getting in your hours, because in the National Guard, you're also deployed, right? So that's an option where you could actually start working. If sounds like you're stateside, maybe, I don't know what amount of time you have, but maybe even working as needed with a local CRM firm in Texas would be a great option for you to just get your feet wet. I know from me, I'm very supportive of hiring veterans. I would certainly be supportive of hiring somebody even who's active duty that would like to get their feet wet. So that's another option.
I would actually say, just to slightly take a step back, you can also, especially if you're doing sort of remote learning, you could go in for the winter time as well for a master's. So you don't necessarily have to start exactly in August for that fall semester. You can start a master's program sort of mid-year, especially if it's part-time and remote. Programs that will accept people who are remote and part-time will also don't really care about setting you up exactly on in the States. School will be starting in the next couple of weeks, but there is that chance to do that. And then in terms of going into a career in CRM, what I'd add to Heather's is, and we've mentioned this quite a bit on the podcast, have somewhat realistic expectations. So yes, a master's is required to get permitted in the Western U.S. states for federal permits and stuff like that. But be realistic, you're not going to have a lot of practical experience. And we've talked about this before, where people come in out of graduate school, be a master's or PhD, and expect to have like crew chief level position or anything like that. And as long as you have that expectation that, yeah, you have a degree and on paper you could potentially be a crew chief or a project manager or PI or wherever people are calling it in their organization, realistic, you need to be starting at the bottom, getting that experience and building your way up. And that's why I think can have that. And it is fairly well expected across most of the profession that, like, yeah, if you're coming out with a master's, you're still starting at the bottom. And We can't speak for every employer, but generally, most of them will have that understanding. Oh, you have a master's, but yeah, your skill level is that of a technician, or you're
Yes.
just learning, and you're not necessarily going to price yourself out of entry-level position by having a master's or a PhD. Quite a few people start with a PhD or a master's at the field tech level. It's pretty common. You're not going to cut off too many avenues by going straight to a master's and not doing an undergraduate. I see that
Yeah.
mostly. We can't speak for every employer where there'll still be some who will be like, oh, I'll never hire a PhD or a master's person to do a field tech job. You will occasionally run into those people, but it's definitely a minority. As long as you have the right expectation, going in with a master's is not going to hurt you. But if you're interested in a longer term career in CRM, it definitely will help.
Yeah. I was going to say, as a hiring manager, unless the person's really lazy, I have absolutely no problem. In fact, I want as fresh, brand new masters or PhDs to have that technical or technician experience. Without it, how can you manage projects? And the only thing that would get in the way of that would be if you come in with a graduate degree and expect to get a higher pay, because the math doesn't work out, right? So there needs to be a certain kind of multiplier, and you need to understand that. If you come out, you have a master's, you have no experience in CRM, you're going to start in the technician, and there may be lots of people with a bachelor's that are getting paid more than you are because they have the experience and you do not. So it's not just education that's going to get you to where you want salary wise. You have to be open to taking, like Doug is saying, that technician role that comes with it, the hourly wage that maybe you're not shooting for long term, but is going to give you both the experience and the pay. So there's no reason why a hiring manager shouldn't be hiring somebody with a graduate degree at the technician level, as long as the person has a realistic expectation of their hourly wage. Is not going to be what they think it should be in the beginning. Andrew, did you have anything to say?
I have a decent amount of stuff to say, but I'm thinking maybe we break and then I give my big spiel.
Okay. All right. Whatever Andrew says. So with that, we'll see you on the other side. Welcome back to CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 316. And we are right now answering a listener's question. Thank you very much for your question related to what to do while they are active duty military, serving as a pilot until 2034. And what would be the best way to set themselves up for getting a position as an archaeologist once they're done? Andrew, you said you had some wisdom to impart on us.
Oh, some scintillating knowledge. During the last segment, I was sitting quiet, even taking a note or two, because I'm like a professional. And
First time in his life that Andrew has not jumped in on a segment.
My hands cramping because I had to write with a pencil for 30 seconds. It's weird. It's a new experience. But I thought that I would do a Doug this time, Doug, meaning that I would play devil's advocate. Yeah. Deal with your own medicine, Doug. So I was like, what if this person wanted to get a PhD? You know what I mean? What if this person is really interested in archaeology and they're interested in something like really esoteric? They're interested in like Roman architecture or something like that, because I've gotten people who have that backstory too. And I agree with everything that Doug and Heather said in terms of getting a job in CRM and all that kind of stuff. And if that's you, that's great. And that is like excellent information. But on the flip side, let's say there's this little goblin in your brain that's just, but I really like the Romans or whatever it may be. I really like the Maya. You could still do that as well. You could even become a multiplayer, kind of like me. Think of myself and actually Bill White, who's not here today, one of our other commentators. Both of us went into this and got a lot of skill set in CRM, but then also continued with a PhD, right? And if you're coming in with a different BA, in this case, it's communication, I believe, any of that is still possible. The one thing I would say that would be almost not possible would be going straight into a PhD program without a bachelor's in anthro. I haven't seen that. I'm sure it's possible somewhere, but that's the one thing I would think in this instance, you would have to get a master's first and then get a PhD elsewhere. That's what I've seen, right?
Or you could go straight. I guess that's what you're saying. You could go straight into a PhD.
Yeah, straight to a PhD.
But you're really going to have to do your homework and see.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be, because you would be behind. With a master's, you can take a class or 2 or 5 and then be okay.
So I guess it depends what country.
Yeah, it does.
So in the UK, you wouldn't. It'd be tough.
See, that's I know it's possible, but
like also a lot of the programs though, you could do a PhD, but they do essentially most programs. States, you go in, you do 2 to 3 years of classes, which is effectively your master's. You have to do sometimes a mini thesis, sometimes exam, something like that. And sometimes they drum you out of the program. So you went in for a PhD and you come out with a master's or nothing in some very sad cases. But you could do that where they do effectively make you get a PhD or not, make you get a master's first.
Yeah.
And then if you pass that, you then get rolled on to continue with your PhD.
That's true.
But again, like certain programs like those, there are certain Bill can speak to this. Like Berkeley would not accept anyone who didn't have a undergraduate in anthropology for their PhD, like a program like that. Like
that's what I'm saying. The application process for a person like that, you're going to be a total dark horse candidate. That's going to be tough. Again, possible, but I would think of that road forward much more if you wanted to get a PhD, which is not necessary, I will get a master's first in this zone and I'll get a PhD somewhere else. And I do want to reiterate, because so many people don't realize this, that a master's and a PhD are 2 different degrees. They don't really work like a scaffolding thing. It's choice A or choice B.
And so that you're going to end up doing a master's, which like I had to push hard to finish mine in the 2.5 years, and it was 3 years. And because there's a lot of programs that will extend you and say, oh, you need to do this and that, and you'd be the perpetual student. And there's a lot of people who are taking 7 years to get a master's, which is ridiculous. So like you have to push hard. Yeah, you have to push hard to get that done in 3 years. But also remember, you're going to do the 3 years, and then it's not like what you're saying, Andrew. It's not like you're going to take that master's and then just build on that and do 4 more years. Most of these programs are going to literally ignore the graduate degree that you got, and they're going to make you start over again. So you're getting, I personally think if you really want to do the PhD, if that really is what you want to do, I think go for it in the beginning, but it would require that you have maybe look around. Schools are changing, especially with what's going on right now. They actually are changing prerequisites. So look around and see, could you conceivably, after building up your bachelor's with a few relevant classes to make yourself prepared to get into a PhD program, I think that's a better use of your time than getting a master's and then going back into a PhD program, because that's a long, hard row.
In this one instance, I think she would have to go that way, and it wouldn't necessarily be a bad use of time, because this is somebody who has very little like anthro class background or whatever. So you get the master's is almost proof of concept, and then you move on. I did it, dude, and I had an anthro BA. I went to the master's, and then I started at ground zero again at the PhD, and that's the one thing you're losing. But we have to remember at the front of this, she was asking or talking about getting another bachelor's, and that would be the ultimate waste of time. So it's like, hey, with the time allotted, at least start with a master's. And also, maybe she doesn't know the nuts and bolts. Does she truly like it? I think a master's is like the way forward here. But
for me, I understand. I agree. I think for her, maybe that is the best path. But for the listeners in general, I just don't want anybody to get
no, you're right.
To have a misconception, right? So if you do have something that works well, like you have a degree that has some anthropology background, I would not go for a master's and then think you're going to be able to climb right into a PhD.
No.
You're really wasting.
No, you're totally right.
2-3 years.
I'd say, I think this goes back to the sort of advice of similar to when we were saying, like, do a field school, but also a lot of places you can usually take 1 or 2 classes without having to do a degree. And it may be one of those things like, if you're still figuring out, do you want to do CRM? Do you want to do academia? All that sort of stuff. Try out just a couple. Usually they allow most universities, and you can transfer, again, depending on what it is, a few credits, and they'll allow you to do that. So I would recommend a field school, 1 or 2 classes, and see what are you starting to look for before you actually even have to commit. So she could do next year or so a class or something, fall, spring, try to get some sort of field experience, maybe volunteer at some museums. I'm not sure how. My gut says it's not possible, but also if you're in the military, part of the law is actually all government agencies need to inventory all their archaeology. So actually a lot of work happens on military bases. There's
That's true.
There's constant call off contracts or just set contracts. I'm thinking like Fort Bliss was a huge one that always had archaeology going on. And she's probably in the wrong thing being a pilot, because they usually send out bomb disposal ordnance people to go along with the archaeologists, because you're out usually on a live fire. It's some sort of training range or something like that. So you have to be aware of bombs. But there might be an option where, again, my gut says military would say no, but if she has the ability to tag along with some of those surveys, there's likely happening on whatever base she's on, there's probably going to be some sort of program with CRM. I imagine, just knowing how military and bureaucracies work, that's probably not going to happen, but you never know. There might be ability for her to belong, or even just be able to go and talk to the CRM people as they're coming in and stuff like that. Because there will be CRM people doing some sort of work at some point on every military base on the continental U.S. So that might be an option. I'd admit, and seeing what you want, and then maybe possibly look at what masters, if we're talking terminal masters or PhD program all the way through, which you can always your bets on, go for a PhD program and then just terminal masters it out after a couple of years if you want. But as everyone else has mentioned, that can be a bit more difficult to get into. But yeah, I just recommend testing out a bunch of different things you could do in archaeology, and then maybe deciding off of that.
I just want to, before we finish up, to just tell you that, to our listener who sent in the question, that you have a lot of skills, especially because you're an officer. You've had leadership training. Whether you're a pilot or otherwise, you still had some training in basic field work, a compass and mapping. And I know for pilots, they have to do that in case, God forbid, something happens where they go down, they need to be able to navigate in any area. So you have so many skills, and I would encourage you to use those skills. And then another really interesting, it's a private firm, but it's called American Veterans Archaeological Recovery. So I would reach out to them because they focus on employing and giving veterans an opportunity to find a career in archaeology using the skills that they learned in the military. And plus, it might be fun also for you because you're going to be with people from the military. You're going to have a bond that way. We'll put this website in the show notes so that you can look into them. But they seem like a really great company, and I think they'd be an amazing resource. It probably could answer a lot of your questions.
Yeah. Just to build on what Heather said, the skill set that she has a huge skill set already. This person can fly airplanes. That's pretty good. I would also think, what do you want to do with your life, ultimately? Because as I was playing devil's advocate before, if you wanted to get a degree in something super esoteric in archaeology, you could ultimately be the person who has a job as doing some sort of pilot thing during the day, But then on the weekends and every so often you work on Etruscan pottery. You know what I mean? So you're in a good place in many ways, because so many people getting into archaeology, they have no skills at all. And so this person, she has so many skills that can be really nice. So think about it that way. Do you want to continue being a pilot? Do you want to continue being a pilot full time? Do you want to do something completely different, or a mix of the two? So you can take any of these avenues as long as you're conscious about it and build during this time.
There is aerial photography.
Oh, yeah.
Not as big in the States, but like Historic England, Historic Environment Scotland they're cutting back on costs, so they don't do it as often, but they still have programs. And then a lot of countries in the Middle East, North Africa, they'll get big grants to be able to do that. So you can, in a way, actually combine your sort of pilot work with your archaeological work, if that is an interest at all.
Fly some LiDAR over.
Yeah, I'm definitely like with Andrew, like it's 9 years away for her having decided on this. Yeah. You can change a lot as a person in 9 years. It may be that you get this degree, you enjoy it as a weekend sort of thing, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's a great life to have as well.
Thank you again for sending in your question. A reminder, all of our other listeners, we're always happy to get questions from you. It's never a trouble, no matter what Andrew says. And thank you so much for listening.
Whatever. Yeah, thanks for listening. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks,
anything. It's motivation just to piss off Andrew. Like, if I could offer like a reward, a Vimo you, like $5 or 10, 20, just wherever it does, it'd be worth it to piss off Andrew.
Why do I do this?
Sadomasochism, I believe, is the term you're looking for, Andrew.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you in the show. Goodbye.
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 That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArcPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye. The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultura Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.